Hey guys, welcome to the show. This week, guess what we're going to be talking about? Your psychology, how to manage it, issues going on with you, specifically what's going on. I know it seems like a huge mess down there, in your unconscious. We could call it subconscious, doesn't matter. These issues affecting your life outside of your awareness, and we got to know how to make sense of it so we can handle it. Right? Bring awareness to the issue, elucidate it, clarify it, and then the transformation. It pretty much takes care of itself after that. And boy, we're going through something right now. I don't know. What are we talking about? COVID, George Floyd, Black Lives Matter. A lot of issues coming up for a lot of people. And I don't know, maybe you could call it hysteria to some degree. I don't know. I think there have been a lot of psychological issues going on in America for at least the past 40 years. There's been an attachment disorder issue. People have forgotten how to connect, forgotten what it really means to be honest. We'll get to honesty today, what it means in the context of codependence. Got a question about that. And, you can do that at first. You can regress in life at first and you just don't notice. It seems fine. What's the problem? I'm still going about my day, but these things catch up with you. And we've seen blips we've seen indications of a mental problem in America, like the crack epidemic or the opioid epidemic, the obesity epidemic, suicides. Like the question of, is there really a mental health epidemic? Well, suicides are up. It's hard to fake that. So suicides are up. So we've seen indications of it, and it's really coming to fruition now, I think, in recent years. And it's not society. I know it seems like society's falling apart. It's you. It really is you. It's a projection of you and your issues. That's what it is. Now we can point to things going on in society and blame them, and maybe you're not wrong. But it's interesting how when it comes to managing your psychological issues, how you can be right. You can be right about something going on outside of you, but still wrong because of the perspective that you bring to it. And we're going to get to that. I finished Moby Dick this week, and I have 2 points. There are 2 points in this book. I mean, there's really more than 2 points. I could talk about it, a lot. I thought it was a great book. I haven't really come to a full analysis, full summary of what I really think. Maybe I'll get to that this week, The Brazen Heads with Derek. But, something that I see guys talking about, an indication of this problem. Guys who are looking out at things maybe going on in culture and thinking, oh, wow, that's really bad what's going on out there. But then they regress, I guess we could say, to this explanation, the good times create weak men fallacy. I mean, you see this everywhere from people who would look at something like maybe the COVID issue, the hysteria around that. I'm not saying it's just the flu, but seems to be some hysteria around that. Can we at least put it that way? The Black Lives Matter issue, and but I think we're just totally tuned out of what it really takes to engage with reality, what it really takes to have a society that we just revert to, like, well, good times. There are good times throughout the 20th century, and it just created weak men, and that's all that happened. I mean, this is very similar. You also hear people, on this side of the spectrum, I don't even know what spectrum it is, say, oh, well, 50% of marriages end in divorce. What's the point in trying? Would I go skydiving if if I thought that 50% of the time the chute wasn't going to open? No, I guess you wouldn't. But if it was only 50% of the time a chute was going to open, wouldn't you try to develop a better parachute? Wouldn't you try to figure out, oh, what's going on with parachutes? Why aren't they opening better? This seems silly. I mean, we have this thing called jumping out of an airplane. You'd think we'd bring more awareness to the thing that's going to save our lives and bring us gently to the ground. What's going on with the parachute? You just give up on skydiving and just go, Now, there are a bunch of skydivers over here who, their chutes open all the time. What are they doing? Wouldn't you try to dig in deeper? Right? 9 out of 10 businesses fail. Okay, so what is the 1 out of 10 businesses doing? What's going on? This is more an indication of you just wanting to regress, you really not looking at the issue for what it is, you tuning out, and in a sense throwing up your hands and saying, well, this is how society is going to be. In a sense, this is a payoff. This is a resentment about a society and a payoff that you get. Why would you go about your life not using your libidinal energy, your psychic energy in a healthy way? Why would you possibly do that? It doesn't work. It doesn't feel good and it doesn't work. Why would you do that? Well, there must be some kind of payoff that you give yourself, that your brain gives yourself, a certain emotional state that you give yourself from as a distraction from the psychic pain. And that's what's going on here with the good times create weak men. Good times do not create weak men. Now, you can look at certain instances and on the surface that looks like it's what happens. This is like the right's version of Marxism. I mean, that this is sociology. This is, you are controlled by your economic circumstances and there's nothing you can do about it. The right says you're controlled by good times. It's not even economic. It's like worse than Marxism, this kind of explanation. Maybe it means we just need to figure something out. What is going on here that we haven't figured out? It has nothing to do with good times and weak men or anything like that. You know what's going on. I would argue, and this isn't the entire picture, but it's better than throwing your hands up and saying, well, good times create weak men. What are you going to do? This is a long philosophical strain that has been building in society. Like the mental health epidemic has been building up in America for the past 40 years at least. Right? We've seen indications of it, but it could be coming to fruition a little bit more. I don't know to what degree. I'm not going to make any predictions about that. It could be coming to fruition a little bit more. And that's what's been going on with philosophy. I mean, we can trace what is going on now with the Black Lives Matter movement. And we can trace what's going on with you. And you're not exempt from in the good times create weak men movement. The good times create weak men meme wars. We can trace all these ideas back to philosophy. It is not from good times. It is from bad ideas. It is from bad ideas that perhaps you're more able to deal with because of the good times. I could see that. I'm not saying the good times had nothing to do with it, but is that the fundamental issue? I can understand how a person's economic situation could influence their psychology. All things being equal, but is that the fundamental issue? Of course not. Gee, I hope it's not, because that's an infinite regress explanation. If it just comes from the economic conditions, well, who decides the economic conditions? Where does that come from? It has to come from somebody. It's not a real explanation, just like, oh, good times create weak men. That's not a real explanation. That's just an explanation you tell yourself, to put yourself in a helpless psychological state. And of course, this meme coming from, the supposed manosphere, these guys who are supposedly manly. What you're essentially doing is the BLM thing. And this isn't about BLM being wrong or you being wrong. It's look, you are doing the same thing as these people on the other side of the aisle that you supposedly are in complete disagreement with. Yeah, just the passiveness that it indicates. You're right, but you can still be wrong. There are issues there. You know what it is digging into philosophy and figuring out the ideas behind BLM and really disabusing the ideas, which you can't do. I mean, that's the thing. Well, we just have not done a good job as a society of disabusing the ideas. And I'm not talking about the idea that Black Lives Matter. Obviously, Black Lives Matter. That's not it. It's just a really great marketing campaign for Marxism. I mean, that's clearly what's going on. But we have yet to disabuse the ideas of Marxism. And I can tell because the most prominent voices on the supposed other side of the spectrum are using the same ideas to supposedly disabuse BLM. What is it that creates a good society? What is it that creates a healthy society? Right? Well, these are the questions we really need to figure out. And just saying, well, good, can't have good times. So what? Now you can't have good times? Right? So now you create a good society, you can't have good times? I mean, there are issues there. I mean, there were lapses. There were lacunae in the Constitution, the founding of America, however great that of a momentous achievement of the Enlightenment that was. I mean, there were blind spots there. We just got to deal with those blind spots. How about we have a discussion about it instead of just, retweeting memes that seem like they're right, that hit us, that our, quote, gut tells us are correct, but really what our gut is telling us is just, well, that's your resentment. That's the payoff. Just tune out from society. And you get that hit of self-righteousness, right? And that's really powerful. I mean, that is a great reward. No question. That is a great reward for tuning out of reality. And I think that's what's going on there. Speaking of tuning out of reality, yeah, but by the way, I mean, look at all the institutions. Yeah, we're not going to go to Moby Dick yet. Look at all the institutions that, we're not going to get to all these questions either. Look at all these institutions that are perpetuating these ideas that you think are abhorrent. These corporations, these universities. I'm not even going to tell you what's common about them. I mean, it's obvious to me. I don't know. Maybe there's more to it, but boy, it seems really obvious to me what's going on. Maybe that's a good place to start looking. All right, we'll go to Moby Dick. Great book. I don't know. I think a lot of people are spending their quarantines doing something useful. Just like reading books that have been on my list that maybe I wouldn't have read otherwise. Because I totally would be going out a lot more if it wasn't for this quarantine, I swear. And then, yeah, I'm like, well, let's read Moby Dick. Actually, I was waiting for, I'm reading The Divine Comedy next. And I started reading it last night. I got through 2 chapters, or cantos. Cantos? I don't know what I'm doing. I mean, this is just like, my reading time is at night. It's supposed to be relaxing, and this is going to be studying. So I don't know. I started it. I'm just going to finish it. I don't know what's going on. Like Dante met up with Virgil. Like Virgil showed up, and they're going to hell. Anyway, maybe it'll start to make sense. I did see some symbolism there coming up. So already, I was tired last night, but I did just finish Moby Dick, and this was not a study. This was a great read. And just a lot of psychological issues coming up here. There's 2 that I want to mention that, really, I don't even know if they're the 2 most important psychological takeaways in the book, but they're the 2 that, really hit me hard, like on a visceral level. Like, oh man, I really felt both of these chapters. The one is, I forget what chapter number it is, but it's The Bachelor. So the guy is going out looking for Moby Dick, Ahab, Ishmael, Queequeg, Starbuck Stubbs, all these guys. They're not obsessed with Moby Dick. Ahab is obsessed with going out and catching Moby Dick. And on their way out to try to find him, they kind of pass this other ship called The Bachelor, and they're having a great time. They have all this whale oil that they had to, there's a great description. They were like emptying out their luggage in a sense to create more room for more whale oil. Just coming back, bountiful catch. They're all going to be rich. They're all having a great time. They're going with the wind. The Pequod, the ship that Ahab and everybody's on, they're going against the wind. And the only thing that Ahab can muster as they go past each other is, hey, have you heard of the white whale? Moby Dick, that's who they're after. The captain of the Bachelors was like, I forget what his response was exactly, but I felt it. It is my truth that I read it as, dude, Ahab, what are you even talking about? We're having fun. We're making all this money. Life is great. We're going with the wind. We're going back home. We're going back home to see our wives and our girlfriends and mate and have a rich, bountiful life. What are you doing? The white whale, does that even exist? What does it even matter? And it's just a great representation of, going against nature versus going with nature. And this really rings true for me. Like, I don't think working on, like, some things are difficult. Some things you just need to strain and put a lot of effort in. I don't know, like chest day, right? Doing squats. You get to the 8th and 9th rep of your squat, the great scene from Pumping Iron, the picture from which I tweet out like every 2 days, of Ed Corney and Schwarzenegger, the 2 more no matter what. That is definitely a part of life. But I don't think that's a part of life with your psychology. I really don't. And this is a novel. This is dealing with psychological issues, specifically Ahab's psychological issues, and effort can really work against you. If you're putting a lot of effort in your psychology, into trying to change who you are, or transform, or come to terms with your past, or work on your resentment, you're just doing it in an incorrect way. It's like the pressure point analogy, right? Just find the right pressure point. You don't have to push hard. You don't have to journal every day and meditate for an hour every day. I mean, that's fun to do sometimes. I don't think it's that helpful when you can push on the right pressure point in your psychology. What is the central issue here? It is not, a good society or good times creating weak men. That is not the central issue. That is the thing you can be distracted by to gratify, some unhealthy psychological issue you have going on. We're going to get to it here with Ahab. But it's not effort. If it's effort, then you're doing it in an incorrect way. You got to look at precisely what is going on in your psychology, precisely what starts the neurosis. And once you get that, bringing up as much awareness to that as possible, it's like, then you're the Bachelor. Then you're going with the wind. You have all, and I don't know if that's true for everything, but I know that's true for your psychology. So much of psychology is, I went to this this cognitive behavioral therapist and it was helpful, but boy, it sure was a lot of work and I couldn't keep up with it. And eventually I just reverted back to my normal state. Right, because they aren't working on the cause. They are not working on the pressure point. Like, there's a problem with your shoulder. Well, let's work on all these muscles around the shoulder. Yeah, but that's not the issue. The issue is this point here in my shoulder that's painful. Right? It's this ligament. It's this ligament that's a little bit strained. And if you're working on the muscles around the ligament, I don't know, that might help. But if I do it too hard, it might hurt. And what's more, there's just going to be a bunch of wasted time and effort around that. And this is, the Pequod and Ahab in at least the second half of this novel. It's just, you can feel the exhaustion. And oh my God, all the things that Ahab's doing, like he has this, he has this divination magician kind of guy, Fadala, who he always calls a Parsi, even though he's not Iranian, he's Filipino. He's like, well, you're from the East, whatever, you're Parsi, it's all the same thing. And there's all these like magical rituals and everything, and he has to really invigorate the crew. He has to get them fired up. I mean, do you have to get yourself fired up in the morning? Do you have to get yourself psyched up? Are you psyching yourself up? Are you doing your affirmations? Trying to motivate yourself? I'm not saying not to do that, but if that's what you need to do every day, then you're working on the wrong issue. Whatever issue you think is your issue, your lack of discipline, that's not your issue. I guarantee you, your lack of discipline is not your issue. That is a result of the inability to manage the real issue. Right? And I really felt that. Maybe I'm not conveying it so well here, but just when reading that, boy, I really felt that. Like, it hit me. Another part of the book that hit me was, this is chapter 132, right before the final chase to Moby Dick, it's called The Symphony. And this is a great speech from the book. I don't know, this is another part of the book that really hit me, and it's Ahab going on about, like, he knows this isn't going to end well. He knows chasing after Moby Dick, not a good idea. But through this speech, through this lament, through this soliloquy, he's essentially saying, I've been doing this, he's 58, I've been doing this since I was 18, I've only been on land 3 years, he has a wife, there's a great line, like, I've only put one dent in my, in the bed of my marriage, in a sense, like, he only spent one night with his wife. And she's a widow, right? She's a widow, even though her husband's alive. A lot of great lines in there. I was actually going to read part of it, but I don't want this podcast to be even more boring than it is. You're asleep already, so it's not going to matter anyway. And he's lamenting all this stuff, and then he just chalks it up to fate, And then there's some great symbolism, some great imagery of, like, the sun rises, the sun sets, this is just my time, this is what I do. There's a lot of those kinds of implications. And then I'm reminded of, actually somebody reminded me of it this week, is the Jung quotation. I don't know where it's from, but I do think that Jung said it. There's other quotations that are attributed to Jung that I don't think he said, like, whatever you resist persists. I mean, he would have said something like that, but he never said that. But the quotation is, if you don't make your unconscious conscious, it will control your life and you will call it fate. And that's what Ahab's dealing with right now. That's why he keeps going after this white whale. That's why he keeps fighting nature. He keeps fighting his own nature, the nature of this beast, this Leviathan. I mean, yeah, how many times does freaking Melville call Moby Dick or whales in general Leviathans? Obviously a harken back to Job. which is when I think that was first used, or at least popularized. I don't know. It's the first reference of Leviathan. But yeah, this goes back to Job, and what's God saying to Job in that book right at the end? Like there's all these things here. Can you hear the dump truck? Maybe I'll try to edit this out. But there's all these things here that like you just can't possibly understand. Like trying to change the unchangeable, trying to change the metaphysical. What is? Trying to change what, quote, God made, what nature made, what is. You're just hurting yourself when you try to go against that. And it's one of those things, it's subtle. It's like the pressure point. If you're 1 centimeter away from the pressure point, it's not going to work. And then you're going to think, oh, I need to push harder. Right? Oh, that was the second half of this book, at least. We need to push harder. That's not the issue. You got to analyze what's going on. Just like the good times create weak men fallacy. You're not analyzing. You're not looking at it. You're not looking at what is and what could be the common theme between, let's just say, universities and huge multinational corporations. What could be going on? I don't know. It's something for us to figure out. Yeah, great book, though. And that's the payoff, too. I mean, in a way, Ahab's in the payoff in that part of the book. And in the symphony where he's given the soliloquy about, well, this is just fate. He wants to die. You can tell that he wants to die. And that's what the payoff is. That's what throwing your hands up, in self-righteousness and resentment for society and saying, well, good times create weak men. That is a small death. Small death, but a death nonetheless. That is you and your libidinal energy regressing from reality. That is not in touch with reality. That is not experiencing the joy and pain of being in touch with reality. That is removing yourself from reality. Right? Just wanting to seclude yourself, to cut yourself off, to go into that state of blissful numbness. I mean, it's not really blissful. It's just blissful compared to the work you really need to do, which is figure out what's going on with you and how your issues are projected out on society. They are. And, what could be the similarity between universities and multinational corporations and how that really has nothing to do with good times or bad times. And it's really just the natural consequence of philosophical ideas that have been part of Western civilization for at least 200 years. $3. The history of philosophy. I have all my philosophy notes pretty much for my entire undergrad waste of time studying philosophy. 120 pages. What else are you going to do? It's quarantine. If I can read freaking Moby Dick, you can go download those notes and maybe figure out what's going on with BLM and how maybe your ideas aren't that different from these ideas that you supposedly disagree with. Maybe it's not about left versus right or BLM versus, I don't know, the right, or, it's not about that. These things are bigger. There's nothing to figure out here. There's just something to outgrow. I'll just leave it there. All right. I have a bunch of questions here. Thank you for these questions, guys. I mean, I really appreciate it. So sometimes you ask these questions that you don't think are a big deal, but it's really important because, without your questions, I don't know what's going on. Right? I'm just going to talk about Moby Dick and good times create weak men fellas. I'm just going to sit here and try to make myself look smart talking about these things. But I think this resonates more when you have questions. Trust me, if you have a question about it, even if it's like this kind of thought in the tertiary parts of your mind, somebody else is thinking about it. No, not that somebody else is thinking about it. Somebody else is obsessing over it. It's ruining somebody else's life, not knowing about this. So I had a tweet this past week. The most extreme form of dishonesty is codependence, and I just got a question through Twitter. Yeah, Animus at animusempire.com. You can ask me questions there, or just through Twitter. Just DM me, whatever. Yeah, so what does this mean? The most extreme form of dishonesty is codependence. Well, what is dishonesty, psychologically speaking? I mean, it's saying something that's not true. That's philosophically what dishonesty. That's what Jordan Peterson talks about dishonesty, and he's right, but it's not psychology. Right? Refer to my article on Jordan Peterson. I mean, I guess I agree with a lot of what he says, but he's not a psychologist. He's a philosopher. He's not telling you how. He's telling you what's going on. That's totally different. So when you're lying philosophically, you're just saying something that's not true. But psychologically, what does that mean? I mean, it means I would argue, based on my view of what psychology is and how emotions link to your boundary, link to self-awareness, lying is pretending, in a sense, like you have a different boundary than you do. And why would you pretend like you have a different boundary than you do? Why would you pretend you have a different identity, right? I mean, why would you be uncomfortable with yourself? Well, there are unmanaged emotions there, right? There are laden emotions that you are not dealing with, like Captain Ahab. And right, you don't understand them. They're controlling your life. You're calling it fate. It's not fate. It's just parts of your unconscious. You're probably been tuned out for so long. If anybody told you what the real issue was, you wouldn't believe them. You'd be like, what? That sounds weird. That's why I got to come to therapy and talk through these things. Free consultations, animusempire.com/schedule. But back to your question. So yeah, that's what dishonesty is. Like, hey, I really have this boundary, but I'm going to pretend like I have this other boundary. So I'm going to say something to make it seem like I have a totally different boundary, whatever, to make myself appear cooler, like more attractive than I really am, right? We've all been on first dates. No, I'm not poor. What are you talking about, right? You're just pretending to have a different boundary. And that's what codependence is. But I think codependence is an extreme version of that, because you're essentially using somebody else to make yourself feel like you're different than you are. That's why I call it extreme. Like, well, I can't lie to myself. That doesn't work. So I'm going to use somebody else. I'm going to use somebody else as a drug to make the lie seem easier. Right? I have all these unmanaged mommy issues, and I can't support myself psychologically. But what I can do is I can start dating this girl, and that's a great distraction from the fact that I have all these unmanaged emotions. Obviously, these unmanaged emotions are going to come up and totally ruin the relationship eventually. Hopefully, your unmanaged issues come up and ruin the relationship. That is the best case scenario. Because you know what that means? That means when you're 45, you're not going to be in this destitute relationship, and you're just like too far gone. Then you're like Captain Ahab in the symphony, right? You're just too far gone. There's no way. Like, I know I'm going to die. I know I'm going after this white whale. I know this is a crime against nature, a crime against who I am as a man metaphysically. But whatever, it's too late, right? That's the worst case scenario. The best case scenario is these issues come up relatively soon, and you break up and you feel really bad, and it takes you 3 years to get over a 6-month relationship. That's the best case scenario. And then you learn. Then you're at least more likely to manage these issues when you can take responsibility for them, when you know how they work. Well, since you're listening, then by definition, you know how. A lot of people don't. And they're just going to go and repeat their patterns. But once you learn what emotions are and how they really work, then you don't have to do that. So yeah, that's why I call it extreme dishonesty. You're like, just using somebody else to make yourself feel a certain way. However cool you feel about yourself when you're lying about who you are or what you've done or whatever, whatever that hit is, just like using somebody else. And of course, the other person isn't on it too. Codependence is a two-way street. How do you tell if you're the one going around saying, oh, my friends are all codependent, oh, my boyfriend's codependent, my girlfriend's this or that, oh, my girlfriend's a narcissist, I'm just finding all these narcissistic women. Yeah, guess who else is a narcissist? It doesn't work out. I've actually kind of noticed it in my life, throughout my single days, as my boundary got stronger and more firm, and it just became more solid in my identity. I mean, I'm still working on it, of course, and probably still have lots of work to do. I'm part of this too. But I just noticed myself, be around women who I could see it. I could see the narcissism, and I could see it's like I was like the classless of roads, like spanning this gap. And on the one side, I'm like, ooh, that's somewhat alluring. On the other side, I'm thinking, oh boy, it's not like it's trouble. You just think, oh, that's boring, right? There's nothing there. I just remember certain instances in my life where I kind of saw both. I'm like, oh boy. Yeah, I can see what's going on here. I could see how me being more of a narcissist, me being more codependent, I would just be naturally attracted to somebody who's more codependent. Yeah, so that's what it is. So that's why it's extreme, because it's like way more delusional. At least when you're lying, you know you're lying. So, oftentimes we get in relationships and it's just to cover up our own issues. We don't even know we're doing it. And it gets really scary. And you may not realize it until you are on the final chase for Moby Dick, and at that point, you're using sun symbolism, She's like, I've already been out here for 40 years. My wife's a widow. You're already telling yourself that you're dead. You're dead psychologically. I think that's what being out at sea is. That's what not coming back to land for too long. So yeah, I hope that helped. Next question here. Got a few more. Yeah, probably won't get to all these, but thank you. We'll get to them next week or in the coming weeks. Gee, what's this next question? I don't even know. I think the guy asked me a legitimate question, but I only wrote down part of it. Something like Tinder hurts your psychology, contrary to approaching girls. I put effort into my answer here, I swear, but I just didn't look at the question. I'm finally looking at it yet. How does Tinder, let's just say the question is, how does Tinder hurt your psychology, contrary to approaching girls? Well, I mean, it's very similar to what I was just saying. Was that the same guy? No, that was a different guy. Yeah, similar to what I was just saying. Just going on Tinder, that's not going to help you manage your issues. Like, it can work, and I think it's a great crutch. We're going to get to crutches here. Okay, so I'll definitely get to this next question, because I think it dovetails nicely into this one. But, why are you approaching girls? Well, okay, why are you going on Tinder versus approaching girls? You're going on Tinder just to get on a date with a girl, right? And that's fine. And I think that's a great crutch as long as you recognize it as a crutch. And go, okay, I'm only doing this because I can't do the normal thing, which is just go talk to a girl who I think looks interesting. Let's say, oh, you look like a nice person. I wanted to come say hi. This isn't too difficult. You're too afraid to do that. So you go on Tinder. But what you're really doing is you're covering up your own insecurity, right? And if you don't handle that insecurity, what's going to happen is what I was just talking about in codependence. It's going to be an extreme form of dishonesty. You're going to go out on Tinder with a girl and meet her. I'm not saying meeting a girl on Tinder is necessarily bad, but you got to manage this approach issue first, because guess what? The approaching doesn't end. I just think it's hilarious, being in a relationship now, hearing singles guys talk, and they almost talk about like, okay, I got to go talk to girls so I can meet one, and then my approaching is over. My approaching days are over. Like, no, that's just beginning. Right? Now you got to start approaching your girlfriend. You got to bring up uncomfortable issues with your girlfriend. And believe me, 6 months into a relationship with your girlfriend, way more is on the line than talking to some freaking girl at the other table at Starbucks. It doesn't end, right? It just gets more difficult. Life gets more difficult. You get more, it's not difficult, it's just more responsibility, more issues, more on your shoulders. That's how you'd want it. Otherwise, it's just libido regression, and you need like resentment and self-righteousness and telling yourself how much smarter you are than other people. And how society's just on the decline because good times create weak men. You have to create this strange kind of a fantasy concoction if you don't engage with reality. So yeah, you think it's gonna end? No, you approach the girl at freaking Panera because that is 1% of what's gonna happen. Later on in the relation, if you want to have a good relationship, like if that matters to you. Now maybe you don't. Maybe you just want to marry a girl or go out with a girl so people don't think you're weird, right? Just so you can get a steady stream of, you won't get a steady stream of sex if you're not approaching properly, right? If you're disconnecting, you're just going to feel disconnected and it's not going to happen. Not saying not to use Tinder, not saying to not use Tinder to use a girlfriend, but understand what you're doing and don't think it's easier in any way. I mean, it's easier in the short term, but in the long term, it's going to be way more difficult. You're going to have to work on this approach issue at some point. Boy, it's way more simple. It's way more just pushing on the pressure point slightly to do it in the library of your college or wherever, or on the quad, playing for, whatever, I don't know. Than to do it, 2 years in a relationship and it's like, yeah, and then you're like, oh, do I want to break up with this girl? Well, in order to break up with her, in order to really see what's going on, I need to talk with her better. Otherwise, I'm not going to know if it's really genuinely coming from me not wanting to be with her, me just avoiding something. Because I've essentially been in an avoidance since I met this girl on Tinder. You're just making it very difficult on yourself. You're not approaching girls to meet girls. That is part of it, and that's a great benefit, and it's Yeah, I was just talking to somebody else about this, like about approaching girls. Like I'm obviously not a dating coach or a PUA guy or anything like that, but just in my experience, I have not seen it not work out as long as you do it consistently. Now I've seen it not work out for a lot of guys, but they're not consistent about it, right? They just go out on like a Thursday or Saturday or Sunday, or I'll go out 1 or 2 days a week. It never works out. You can do it every day. It always works out. That's just been my experience. And that makes sense psychologically why that would be true. Yeah, I mean, it's like welfare versus UBI. And if this is going to get into this next question of the difference between, yeah, I'm not going to get to both these questions. The difference between something like anti-anxiety medication, anxiolytics, like Xanax. I mean, that's a pretty popular one. Xanax, or what's the other one? Not Klonopin, right? Antidepressants. So I'm always trying to urge you guys to dive deeper, figure out what's going on with your issues. What do I think of prescribing these drugs? I think I've talked about this before. I think drugs are fine. It's all in how you use them. But I do think there are two broad categories of drugs that we really need to differentiate between these two. And the anti-psychiatry crew, they kind of focus on the bad aspects of one kind of these drugs, the antipsychotics, the drugs that really just kind of just tamp down your issue, and they seem to really have long-term negative consequences. Like, you have to understand, it's amazing how these issues come around. But I was talking with somebody else this week about how, and I think I mentioned this in an article, why did we stop doing lobotomies? Remember that? Remember back in 1949 when the guy who invented the lobotomy won the Nobel Prize for medicine or something? Why did we stop doing that? We thought it was great. Well, the reason that we did it was because we developed something called Thorazine, an antipsychotic medication, and what it does to your brain is essentially the same thing as a lobotomy. And not physically, but psychologically, that's what goes on. And there's great evidence coming out now that says, yeah, once you go on antipsychotics, you essentially can't go back. You can't go back to be normal. I mean, I'm not saying never to take antipsychotics. Some people need to take them. But if you're at the point of taking antipsychotics, then you need to be in an institution. Now, we give people antipsychotics who are, showing signs of borderline or bipolar, and they just may be showing signs of it because they're going through, everybody has shown some kinds of borderline personality or bipolar at some point. Wild mood swings. And maybe you're just going through a transition in your life. That's how we used to treat it. Back in the 1950s, when the mental health, whatever was wrong with the mental health field back in the 1950s, was way better than now. You go into a mental institution for a month or two, come out, you weren't going on any medication. Most people weren't getting lobotomized. And there's a chance to recover. Now you go on antipsychotics and you essentially can't recover. So there's really two kinds of drugs. Like, there's the antidepressant. Well, maybe there's three kinds. There's antidepressants, then there's antipsychotics, and then there's kind of in between, like something like Xanax, anxiolytics, right? Xanax or Klonopin. I think antidepressants, it's a completely different animal than something like an antipsychotic. What an antidepressant does is, and like I always say, it's like antidepressant's a misnomer. It's not a real name for that drug. It's really not, oh, you have depression, go on this. It helps your depression. That's part of it, but really what it is just a mood stabilizer. Right? And there's a difference between UBI and welfare. UBI, the libertarian idea. Why would a libertarian come up with, wanting to give everybody free money every month? Well, because this incentivizes you to not be on the government. I mean, if we just give everybody the same amount of income, then it incentivizes you to work on your own. It incentivizes you to engage more with reality as opposed to welfare. That's the antipsychotic. It just kind of tamps you down, and now you have a bunch of evidence that says, well, once you go on welfare, now your family is going to be on welfare for 4 generations, because now conversations around the dinner table, if you even have that, probably not, but conversations around the dinner table, dad's gone, mom's freaking, she's freaking out psychologically. She can't be a mom or a dad. Now conversations are about, well, how do we get more welfare, as opposed to how do you get a job? What do you need to learn? And it just changes things. It changes your psychology, and that's the that's a good analogy for what an antipsychotic does. So to your question of, I want you to dig deeper. The thing about antidepressants is it helps you to dig deeper. It just helps you to be unstuck. And everybody's on Twitter saying, oh, antidepressants, oh, just be a man and suck it up. Okay, you don't have depression. You've never seen it, right? Your girlfriend dumped you and you kind of felt sad for a few months. That's fine. That's normal. That does not require an antidepressant. I do think these things are overprescribed. But if this is a question of you're at a psychiatrist and he's trying to give you drugs, try an antidepressant if you've kind of been stuck for a while. And if these issues go back a long way, it's just like taking a psychological loan out. Psychological loan that you don't even need to pay back. Go on a minimum dose at first. Again, go listen to the psychiatrist, right? This is not medical advice, obviously, but listen to the psychiatrist. I think it's fine to go on a minimum dose of that, just see how it works. And if it doesn't work, you can go off it. It doesn't affect you permanently. Like this idea that antidepressants affect you permanently, like antipsychotics or anxiolytics, something like Xanax. I mean, the thing about Xanax is I'm not against taking that too. I just be more careful. Take it when you need it, as opposed to, definitely not turn into an everyday thing. Some of the drugs aid discovery. Some drugs aid connection with reality. That's why I think psilocybin, LSD, these things, they can be useful when used in a certain context. They can be very revealing. Now, I don't think this ever takes the place of connection and really talking through your issues and getting honest about what's going on with you. Of course not. But these things can be helpful aids. I'm not saying you need them, but it's there for you. And it's silly. It's like you're just making yourself into a martyr to not go on one of these medications and just try it out. Why would you do that? It may help. And if it doesn't, it's not that big of a deal. If you go on Zoloft or something, it's fine. Okay, it didn't work. So, it's about, some drugs aid in general. Drugs, antidepressive medication, this aids brain development, this aids your connection with reality. Antipsychotics limit it. And it could really have long-term effects on your brain, especially the younger you take them. So it's really important to be concerned about that. And Xanax is fine. I understand that there's a high dependency for it, but Xanax is fine just for acute situations if you need it. But definitely not an everyday thing. So that's it. There's a lot of nuance here is what I'm trying to say. And whenever you hear discussions about drugs and psychiatry and, is mental disease real or is it just a disorder? It's always black or white, right? Everything psychiatry is doing fine. Oh, of course you need drugs. Or, oh, mental disease is just a figment of your imagination. It's not real. You can't show me where is it in the brain? It's not real. Right? I mean, this is the book by Thomas Saz. Right, The Myth of Mental Illness. I talked about that. How it just ruined the mental health profession. And it's why, we can't give people a proper treatment. I'm just kind of getting off topic. It's the end of the show. I guess I'm going on there. I feel like I'm leaving something out there, though. Yeah, the point is it's not black or white. There's a lot of gray area. And, right, boy, it really depends on the situation. In general, I would, if somebody's trying to prescribe you antipsychotics, unless you're just on death's door and it's to keep you alive, I wouldn't do it. I mean, it's essentially a lobotomy. And the drugs have definitely gotten better since Thorazine, but I don't know. From my perspective, not by enough. Nothing is going to replace just reaching out, connecting, and if that's difficult enough, then an antidepressant can be really helpful, and you can go off it later. It's no big deal. I'll leave it there. Thank you guys for watching. Yeah, in the beginning of Moby Dick, maybe Ahab could have gotten by with antidepressant medication, but by the end, by chapter 132 of the symphony, he just needed a lobotomy. He just needed a chemical lobotomy, which is what an antipsychotic is. All right, I'll really leave it there. Thank you guys for watching. Again, we do free consultations, animusempire.com/schedule. Thank you so much. I appreciate this. Tell a friend, talk about these ideas with your friend. And as always, I wish you, pain, joy, reality, all great things, and I want you to have them.